All right, ready when you are.
I think I'm.
Yeah, all right. Hello, everyone. My name is Nanor Momdjian, and I am the owner of Noren, which is a vintage and secondhand e-commerce clothing store. I sell online, and I also sell at flea markets and host pop-up shops occasionally. And basically, how I started in this line of work is about 7 years ago, I started working at a vintage shop in Eagle Rock called Top Knot. And the owner, Natalie, basically inspired me to branch off and start on my own. So, about 6 years ago, I started as Penny Lane Vintage. And then throughout the years, I wanted to rebrand and come up with a name that reflected me and my brand better. So I changed it to Noren. And Noren in Armenian means again. So I thought it would be, it's a play on words because you wear vintage clothing again and again. You give it a second life, it's recycled. So that's pretty much the story behind my name. But yeah, it's been a crazy journey. I definitely it's, have seen a lot of growth since I started in 2015. And how I started was I basically would go around to different thrift stores such as Goodwill, Salvation Army, and local mom and pop thrift shops, and I would source vintage clothing. And the difference between vintage and thrift can be anything secondhand. It doesn't have to be old necessarily. Thrift could be anything from like a shirt you bought last week. But what vintage is specifically, it's more curated, and for something to be considered vintage, it has to be 20 years or older. So at this point, I think anything from like 2002 and beyond is considered vintage. But honestly, I feel like these days it's you can get away with stuff like from early to like 2010 and a little bit before that. So yeah, I basically just collect pieces that excite me and things that I personally would wear. I don't typically buy things that don't spark joy in me. So it's definitely more handpicked and super curated. And my main focus on the kind of articles of clothing that I've been picking as of recently are more focused towards designer vintage. So anything from like Prada and Gucci, Miu Miu, Fendi, you name it. That's kind of the pieces that I look out for these days because I don't necessarily want to have an abundance of inventory. I'd rather have a smaller, more curated inventory. It's easier to keep track of, and it's to me it's a little bit more cost efficient because selling one thing for me is like selling five $20 t-shirts. So that's kind of where I'm headed as of now. And I still am obviously growing my business, so it's still not exactly where I want it to be, but definitely I want to say that throughout this pandemic, it's definitely given me more time to focus on it. And I've been able to grow my business more since leaving my job during the beginning of the pandemic. And, in the beginning, it scared me because I thought, I didn't know where the world was headed. So I thought that things were going to be bad, but in turn, it encouraged people to shop online more. So that was a huge, huge plus for me. And I basically ran out of my inventory and hit a wall because sourcing during the pandemic was really, really difficult in person. So I resorted to sourcing online and hunting all over the internet for special pieces. And that's essentially when I started also buying more designer pieces, because I didn't have to buy as much. I would I would only buy a few pieces at a time, but the return was way better for me. So that's why I decided to continue sourcing more designer clothing. And then once things kind of got better and settled down, I hosted a month-long pop-up shop just this last June. I was from June to July, and my friend Irene, who has a contemporary women's line, but it's mostly made with sustainable fabrics. Her brand is called Gil. She and I collaborated on this pop-up, and we did it together in Silver Lake. And at first we were kind of skeptical because we didn't know how it was going to be, how the turnout was going to be. We were worried because people had just started getting out there and feeling comfortable going into stores and stuff. And we were so surprised to see the turnout. It was so incredible and better than I expected. And it really made me realize that more and more people are getting into vintage and secondhand as we move forward with people being more conscious about climate change and just how much the fashion industry in itself pollutes the environment. I think people want to find more sustainable ways to shop, and honestly the best way to do that is to shop secondhand and vintage clothing, because what's happening is it's it's being recycled, it's being kept out of our landfills, it's given a new life, and it's like this constant cycle of these traveling clothes, but it's always ending up to someone, which is why it's so important to, you know, I like the saying, buy less, but buy something of more quality. So there's a reason why vintage clothing has lasted all these years, because things were just made differently back then. They weren't made with too many synthetic fibers. If you anything from essentially the early 80s and beyond, like tapping into the 50s, 60s, 70s, were all natural fibers like wool and silk and things that don't necessarily damage, not that it doesn't damage easily, but it's definitely something that's going to last way longer. So just just it just says a lot about what we're buying today with fast fashion, and how quickly you'll wear something a few times and you'll notice a snag or a hole, and you're like, well, I gotta, I can't wear this anymore. So what happens is those pieces that you don't wear anymore, especially fast fashion pieces, it loses its value. There is nothing special about it anymore. And sadly what happens is, you think by donating these pieces to like Goodwill and other thrift stores helps, but the truth behind all of this is people do not realize that when they get an abundance of these fast fashion pieces, what happens is they stay there for long periods of time, and essentially not enough of it gets sold. And what happens is then they have to, unfortunately, it still ends up in a landfill. So that's why I can't stress enough how important it is to buy vintage over new clothing. Not saying sometimes you cannot find everything vintage, you need newer pieces, but moral of the story is it's to be conscious, and like things that are of, like a vintage coat is going to last you forever, or vintage jeans or a sweater, or staple pieces like that are going to last you a lifetime. It's important to buy vintage pieces because that's never going to lose its value. There's always going to be somebody who wants that, who may even be willing to pay more for it. So it's just a little bit like people don't realize this when they're shopping sometimes, because they need something quick, they need something fast. I need a dress for this weekend, or, I need this. So they immediately think, okay, well, I'll head to Zara or I'll head to H&M and all this stuff. But it's also important to note, like, supporting small businesses too is another thing that I'm very passionate about. And, I know that it's not accessible for everyone to constantly be shopping small businesses because sometimes their price points are higher. But it is also important to think like, okay, maybe I will save up this month, and at the end of the month, there's this small business that I really love. I will go in and support them and buy something that I love from them. And in turn, it's like you're not only helping the environment, you're helping somebody's dream come true. And with every sale from a small business, that's like somebody doing a little dance versus like supporting these corporate companies where it's, people don't, you're disposable. It's like, okay, if you're not going to shop there, someone else is going to shop there. So it's just making these conscious choices on a daily, I think, is very important. And it's the whole reason why I even got into vintage in the first place, because it's helping the environment. It's also unique. Every piece is truly one of a kind, and you're not really going to come across these things again. And it just gives you a more personal style versus like, going into a fast fashion store and everything is so copy paste, copy paste. There's so many of the same things, it kind of gets, it's too saturated. But I love it when people compliment what I'm wearing and I get to say, it's vintage, nobody else has this. And that's kind of like, it's a cool feeling knowing that, somebody else may not have what you're wearing. So it kind of feels more intimate and personal. Plus, with vintage clothing, it tells such a story. These pieces were created in a different time, when our parents were babies, maybe when our parents weren't even born. And so much of history you can tell through an article of clothing. Especially something to note is, for instance, I get this question a lot, like, how do you know when something's vintage, or how do you know when it's from what year? So for me, it's become so natural. I can instantly detect what year something comes from by looking at the zipper. Anything essentially with a metal zipper comes from before like the 1970s. So the 1950s and 1960s and before is when you would use metal zippers. Or different things like how to detect if a vintage t-shirt is really vintage is by looking at the stitching on the sleeve. If it's a single stitch, that means it's from early 90s, I want to say, and beyond. And anything after that is 2 stitches on the sleeve. It's just like little things. Looking at the tag, a lot of vintage tags are sewn on and it's not printed. People started printing on their tags in the recent years. So just little things like that. The collar, if it's a pointed collar, it's from like a super pointed collar, it's from the 70s. A shorter collar would be from the 50s. Little things that indicate, people look past, like you may be thrift shopping and you don't realize that you're looking at something that's worth a lot, or looking at something super old. So just little things. It's all about attention to detail, and that's how you detect vintage clothing. And basically, I just it's been such a passion of mine doing this for the past 7 years. I ultimately, my goal is to have my own shop one day, an actual brick and mortar, for people to come and to create an environment where people feel comfortable shopping for vintage clothing, especially because I feel like a lot of people are intimidated by it because, they don't know if it's going to look good on them, or, and the thing is, you always have to try something on. You cannot say like, oh, that's not going to fit me, that's not going to look good on me, because many times I've had customers where I was like, you know what, no, I know it's going to look good on you, try it on, and then they end up loving it. And my tip to everyone out there is to have a good tailor. I can't stress enough how important it is to find a really good tailor that you love, because just because something doesn't fit you doesn't mean you can't make it fit you. I get all of my clothing tailored for the most part. So it doesn't, it just because something is big doesn't mean it can't fit you. So I take everything to the tailor and I get it custom fit, and it fits me even better than anything that I would buy from the store. So that's like my biggest advice to everyone, is to definitely find a tailor. And I guess lastly, I would say that, it's really important, especially for people who are looking to just get into the fashion industry in general, whether it be vintage or whatever, because I know not everyone is going to be doing the same thing. It's just so important to put yourself out there, to network. I think people forget, we've gone past the whole like going into places and introducing ourselves. I feel like that is so important and people need to do that more. I know people would do that in the past, but my biggest advice is, if you really want that job, find whoever, like the top person who works there, find their email, send them a message, and if possible, if they have a physical space, whether it be a store or some kind of office, go in and hand in your resume. That is the biggest game changer, especially nowadays when looking at LinkedIn, and you see how many people apply to each job, it kind of gets very overwhelming, because you see thousands and thousands of people apply for the same job, because it's right there at their fingertips. Everyone's online, everyone's searching for a job. So what is going to make you stand out over anyone else is to take that extra effort to go and introduce yourself. I think people, especially after the pandemic, it's a little bit hard for people, once they were all inside the house and weren't leaving and working from home. But it's definitely something that people should practice more often, is going in and meeting people. And definitely when you're in a store or somebody like, and you're interested in working there, go talk to the manager, go speak to somebody who works there, introduce yourself and see if they're hiring. And if not, always hand in a resume either way, because that is what's going to set you apart from so many people. Yeah, so that's basically it. If you guys are interested in following me, my shop is called Noren, and my handle is at shop Noren. Noren is spelled Noren. And if anybody has any questions, you can always DM me or ask me on here, and I'd be more than happy to answer for you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And if anyone has any questions now, you can like put it in the chat, or you can turn your mic on.
I have a question.
Yes.
So like I'm interested in this, like curating like pieces myself. So I was wondering if like, do you need to have like knowledge and like business to like network with other people, or is this something that you can just do like from your room?
Honestly, I think that as long as you are passionate about whatever it is, you don't necessarily have to have a professional education on something. I think for me, a lot of my quote unquote education came from other people, especially working with my boss at Top Knot. She basically taught me everything I know. So if you are interested in something and you know someone who works in the same industry, like a close friend or something, or even if it's just something you want to brush your knowledge up on, you can be self-taught. You don't necessarily have to go to school for that specific thing. Of course, school helps in different ways, how to be more business minded and all that stuff. But as far as knowing about something specific, you can always utilize the technology we have. Or if you have, this is what I would do actually, I went to FIDM. So what I would do is I would go into the library and I would go through all the resources we had, especially everything related to vintage fashion. I would go read vintage, like we would have every copy of essentially Vogue from all the years, and I would go through and look through and see the different styles and stuff like that. So definitely utilizing your resources will get you really, really far.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any more questions? Don't be shy.
I have a question.
Yes.
What was like the biggest challenge you had when like starting your brand?
The biggest challenge, I guess, would have, okay, the biggest challenge was for me in the beginning was pricing my items. I didn't know necessarily what things were worth in the beginning. And I definitely didn't want to scare people away by pricing something too high. But over time, I learned to realize how much time I actually spend sourcing each item, taking care of it, washing it, mending it, marketing it, I put so much time into all these pieces that I never accounted, putting that into the cost. People think that just because it's vintage, it's old, it's used, it's not special, so they want to buy it for super cheap. But that's not necessarily the case. For example, when I'm sourcing, it takes me hours and hours and hours of time and research and going from different store to store, and also gas from driving around LA and like trying to find places to source. So, you are putting a lot of time and effort into finding these pieces. And you also have to be mindful of that when pricing your pieces, which is something I learned way later on. So I definitely was underselling my things in the beginning. So I guess where I'm going with this is always know your worth and don't be scared to, price something according to that. Because at the end of the day, the customers that, appreciate you the most will make the effort to spend that money, and they understand where it's coming from. And I think fast fashion is also at fault for this, because people look at fast fashion and go, well, I could buy this sweater for $20 at Forever 21. Why is your sweater $40? But people don't realize I'm one person behind this, and I'm not a corporate company, and I'm not paying people, in factories, especially underpaying people. So it's just being mindful of that. So it definitely took me a while to know my worth and know my value. And I think now is when I definitely feel more like I finally figured out pricing and knowing the worth of things and knowing my worth as well.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat. Catherine asks, since you went to FIDM, do you think that gave you an advantage? And does going to a fashion school play a role in reaching your dream career?
Absolutely not. I went to FIDM because I thought that it was the only way, like, if you went to FIDM, you could easily get into the fashion industry. But to be honest, that doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter where you go to school. Honestly, all that matters these days is how much you're willing to put effort into what you're doing. And networking, networking, networking. I cannot say this enough. Talking to people, even if you're more of an introvert, you don't need to talk to people in person. You can find people online, like look for resources, join Facebook groups, that's another thing. I actually am a part of this Facebook group called Creative Women of Los Angeles. And it's basically where, you know, it's all women who work in the creative industry, and they always post opportunities. And, you know, I've met a lot of amazing people on there. So Facebook has a lot of these amazing forums that you can join and talk to people. You don't necessarily have to meet them in person, but you know, you get insight from them, and they're so kind and lovely, and you know, everyone just wants to help each other out. So it doesn't matter where you go to school at all. It just matters that the how important something is to you, that you know you're going to go above and beyond to make it happen. You know, you can manifest something, but you also have to put in the work. And of course, it's important to also know that things take time. Not everything is going to happen overnight. How I started in the beginning and where I am now is completely different. I've worked retail jobs, I've worked as an intern. I definitely made my way up, and I still have a long way to go. So another thing I could say is don't put pressure on yourself to succeed overnight. It definitely is going to take a minute. As long as you know you're putting forth the effort, you know, it's everything's going to work out. So doesn't matter where you go to school.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Have any other questions?
What was the first item like you invested in?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess when I recently started buying more designer pieces. So something, for example, I invested in was a Chanel bag, and I still scored it for, you know, a pretty decent price. And knowing that that value is already way more than what I bought it for is definitely like worth it to me, because you know, you think like some items are worth the investment, especially with designer pieces. Sometimes you just got to go for it. You think, ooh, I don't know, should I do it, should I not do it? With designer pieces, especially big brands like Chanel or Prada, it's always, if you know, are able to afford to invest in it, do it, because you're never going to regret it. And it's only going to get more and more profitable as the years go by. So the older something gets, especially designer items, the more the value is going to go up, especially something like a Chanel bag.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Any other questions? And you can always put in the chat if you're nervous to speak up.
I have
Yeah, and if you, oh yeah, go ahead.
what does like a typical day at work look for you?
Oh, that's a good question. It's kind of all over the place, but I really try hard to organize my days out. Honestly, one of the best things that I could recommend is buying a planner. I don't know about everyone else, but I still like to physically write things down. I feel like I'm more productive that way. I have to cross things out like by hand. It makes me feel good. So buying a planner was definitely like a game changer for me. So basically, I start my day by immediately going online, looking for new items that I could source depending on what season it is. Right now, I'm buying more fall winter pieces. So constantly looking for like really cool coats and sweaters and all that kind of stuff. And then what I do is I do some Instagram marketing. But to be honest, with Instagram, it's becoming so kind of exhausting lately with the whole algorithm. But I still really try to, you know, to market myself, promote posts, work on my next photo shoot. I shoot everything on my own, and I reach out to some friends who are kind enough to model for me. and you don't need a fancy camera or anything. I shoot most of my things on iPhone, and people don't even know the difference. So definitely plan to constantly shoot, because I've stopped shooting product on myself. I feel like I'm less critical about how the photo is when it's on someone else versus when it's on me. So I definitely feel more comfortable shooting my pieces and styling my pieces on other people. And then basically I'll start measuring all the new items that I get in, and make a separate tab for that, so I keep it all on file, so that when I'm ready to post the new items, I just copy paste, and it makes my life so much easier. And yeah, that's basically what a day looks like, but a lot of time is spent sourcing. You know, it really it takes a long time. Like, I'm online for like hours and hours, or at the thrift stores for like 3 hours at a time. Like, it's crazy, but I love it. It's like a big treasure hunt for me. So it's definitely fun.
We have a few questions in the chat.
Yes, I see. What are some Facebook groups or websites to keep in touch with various curators? If I type it in this chat, can everybody see it?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me type that. So it's called Creative Women of Los Angeles, and it's a Facebook group. And I think if you just search it, you can find it. Do you have any tips on how to market a brand on social media? Honestly, I'm still learning that. It's really hard these days, because they're really milking the whole reels thing, and paying to promote things. And for me, it's hard, because I love photos. I love photography. I love taking photos, and making reels is not something that I'm passionate about. And it's maybe my view on it will change once I actually make one. But to me, I never want to do something that's not me, or inorganic, or I'm just doing something because it's trending. I always want to stick to what I know and what I love. So honestly, I've just been marketing by taking amazing photos and making content and working with people that inspire me. And as well as I do occasional like paid promotions. You don't have to spend a lot of money to see even a little bit of growth. Like, I'll spend like $5 a day for like a week, and it'll get me some traction. But definitely something that's helped market my page is doing occasional story sales. So every month or so, I'll set up a story sale. So I'll post everything in my stories, and that kind of gets people on my page and going through my stuff. And it's actually it's really been helping me a lot, especially during the pandemic. I feel like that's where I was making the most money. It was when I was doing my story sales. Does having social media have an influential role on your career? It does. Honestly, Instagram, in my opinion, is it's like I have a love-hate relationship with it. It's amazing because I've honestly met some amazing people on it, and people that I've connected with and networked with. But it's also very physically draining and mentally draining, because having to keep up with all these influencers and these people who are constantly posting, it's really hard. We can't pretend like we don't we have that time in the world. Like, I'm working still. I'm not an influencer, so I don't have the time to take these photos every single day, especially when I'm outsourcing and doing other stuff related to my brand. So it's definitely been a struggle, I'm not gonna lie. But when I do take the time, the mental break, which I also think it's important, I think you can't fall into the trap of I constantly need to be posting, or like, why am I not getting enough likes? Or, you know, that stuff it's not gonna help you in the long run. So what I like to do is every week or so, I'll take a little social media break. I'll recap, I'll think about, well, what can I do next that inspires me? So I'll plan a photo shoot, and every time I do those photo shoots, I get so inspired again, and it gets me so excited to post the photos that I captured, because I style, I shoot, I creative direct, I do everything on my own. But in turn, it makes me so proud to come out with the content and say that, I did this. And I think that's the part where it gets me excited, when people look at my photos and they ask, like, who took these photos? These are amazing. So it's kind of like a boost of confidence, which kind of gets me more inspired to create more content again. Any more questions? And I'll also link I'll put my for my store on here. And you guys are more than welcome to DM me if you think of any questions later, or, if anyone's interested in anything in my shop, please DM me before, and I'll give you guys a little secret discount.
Thank you. We learned so much today from you, and like you're so inspiring, and I love like how passionate you are about your job. It's very like inspiring to everyone. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much for the time and opportunity. And I wish everyone the best of luck. And I know you guys will all be successful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Thank
You
you.
too.